Hi there, how you going? Lamont here, language learning video. That's what this is. Okay, so I put a video up that showed sort of a montage of my Swedish learning process with Skype conversations cut into me talking about it loosely, right? I had to cut a fair bit out just because it would have been a 20-minute video otherwise. And I got a message on Facebook saying, well, how did you actually go about learning Swedish? And at first I thought, well, I don't know, didn't you watch the video? But then I sort of thought, yeah, I guess it doesn't really answer how I learned Swedish. Truthfully, it's not the easiest question to answer because I don't really know. As in, I'm not saying like one day I just woke up and I could speak Swedish, but I don't sort of know the process exactly. I'm still learning it myself, and I'm really looking forward to getting better at it so that I can apply it to my other languages and learn them much more quickly. But I was thinking about this, how it's more beneficial if we think about it backwards. So if we think about how, let's say for example, you're an English native speaker, but you're 15 and you're not super well educated. Can you improve your English from that stage? Absolutely you can. Your English is probably not as good as some 12-year-olds who are well educated, and probably not as good as a lot of non-native speakers who have moved to an English-speaking country or done university in English. It's surely not as good as those people, right? So you can definitely improve it. And how would you improve it? You would learn it through English. Like that's your only language, so you would learn it through other English. You would learn what new words mean. You would learn new constructions. You would learn kind of fancy older words like thou and thee and stuff that like isn't really in the modern English language, but comes up in certain texts. Thinking about how you learn your native language is really important to thinking about how you learn second languages, because especially if you're talking higher up, because a lot of people, Luca Lampariello has said this, a lot of people stop at about the B2 level because after that they don't actually know how to get better. And what they fail to realize is how much stuff they did after they got to that level in their native language. So let's say that's anywhere between 8 years old and 14 years old, depending on lots of factors, for most kids. That's when they're at a B2 level. To get to C1, well, basically they went to high school, right? Where they were forced to read, they were forced to do research in their native language. They were forced to talk about topics like, changing times, and they were forced to read Dickens maybe. And I'm not necessarily advocating for all this stuff, but I do think Dickens is awesome. But that's what they did, and that took them to C1, and generally I would say that C2 is probably if you did very well in your last years of school, if you read a lot, if you were able to write with clarity and with a bit of finesse, you knew ways to say things that sounded a little bit different. That's kind of C2, and if you don't get it at school, then you generally get it in higher education, university, TAFE, something like that. But let's say you want to get from B2 to C1. How would you do that? Basically try and replicate the experience of a high school kid, right? You have to read a lot. You have to write about what you've read. You have to take that to a teacher of the language, or at the very least a native speaker, and say, like, what do you think about this? And they're like, oh, that does, it's sort of technically right, but it doesn't sound quite right. And just do that over and over again, okay? And I'm not saying that you should do the same thing over and over again in your language learning, but like do lots of stuff to do with the language. Read books, listen to audiobooks, listen to news reports, people speaking everyday kind of language, and when I say finally, I mean sort of proper high language. Do all that kind of stuff. That's how you would get to C1. I've not done that in Swedish, okay? I haven't done that yet. I haven't listened to that much input. I haven't read that many books or anything, but that's how I would do it. But going back from there, well, people say, okay, so this is why we're doing it backwards, because you can see how that process works. Hopefully, I'm explaining myself clearly enough to show you how that process would work, B2 to C1. What about B1 to B2? And I know the levels are a little bit arbitrary. I'm just using them as sort of rungs in our ladder of where we're up to in the stage. So B1 to B2. We need to do that with a little bit of your native language. You don't have to, but it's easier if you do. So it's actually quicker. For example, learning the word for a political coup, or the Democratic Republic or something like that. It's much quicker to just learn it that Democratic Republic is whatever in French, rather than someone trying to explain the concept of a Democratic Republic to you in French when your French is at B1. It doesn't really work. So you're going to need to learn a lot of grammar and a lot of words and some new grammatical constructions and everything. And how you do that is sort of good news and bad news. It's just traditional study. So, I mean, I still advocate for speaking a lot, even at this level, right? Trying to explain yourself a lot. But it's basically just you try to explain yourself, and a teacher or a native speaker says, okay, so you mean this, and you either write that down or you record it, or however, in some way, you keep a record of that, and you put it in a list somewhere, and then you try to use it again. And don't put it in a list somewhere, and then sit down one day and try to memorize that list. If that's really you, if that's your deal, then sure, go for that. But the reason I don't advocate for that is because studies have shown that things that you use, things that you're involved in the process of learning because you're using them, sink in much faster. So, why would you sit there and try to learn it and then try to remember to use it in a conversation? As soon as you've heard it, try to use it. Not often enough, regrettably, but I try to use things when I hear them quite soon, as in I try to use them in a different way, and sometimes I just make up an excuse to use them. I'll just say something that's not even true, and the teacher will say, oh really? And I say, no, I was just using that sentence, right? People might think that's weird, but like, you learn the language faster that way. Your teacher doesn't care, and yeah, so do that. Okay, that's from B1 to B2 to get a reasonable grasp of most of the idioms and a lot of the words that most people use. So, for example, like B2 would be that you can watch most YouTube videos and understand them in the target language. I can do that in Swedish, for sure. But I can't, read a book and have that be a comfortable experience, the same as it is in English, and just sit there and read and be like, yeah, I fully get this. Well, I do get it, but it takes a very long time. So that's why I know I'm not at C1. And I also can't speak with the same confidence as, say, a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid who grew up in Sweden. So I know I'm not at C1. Sorry about the brightness, guys. The sun's coming out. Going back from, I won't even bother with A2 and A1. They're both A levels. They're just 0, right? Going back to 0 to B1. Because people say, well, that's all very good if you can study in Swedish, if you can have some, or whatever language, if you can have some kind of conversation in that language, great. Then I understand how you can progress. But I'm not at that stage yet. How do you get to the stage that you can have a conversation? Well, in that case, I would say, watch the video, the montage of the Skype conversation. Because did you see my first conversation in Swedish? It's so bad. And I've watched that whole conversation back. It's awkward. It was hot that day in Australia, but I was sweating anyway. I was literally sweating because of how difficult it was and how awkward it was. And thank you so much to the people, those early friends, I didn't pay them, they weren't teachers, who sat through my awful Swedish just to help me. Like, it was so difficult. And I think the thing with A0, or 0 to B1, that most people don't want to acknowledge is just that it's going to be hard. Like, if you want to get to the stage of having conversations and for that not to be uncomfortable, like if someone walks up to me right now and just starts speaking Swedish, that's not uncomfortable for me, okay? There's things I can't do the same way as I can do them in English, but it's totally not an uncomfortable experience, and I generally speak to Swedes in Swedish unless there are non-Swedish speakers around. But to get to that stage, you just have to go through uncomfortable stages. That's just it, right? It's the same as like running. It's a perfect example, actually. Running is very often a perfect example for language learning. When I started running, which I regrettably have not done much of lately, when I first started running, I could not run at all. I was so unfit and so overweight that I couldn't run at all. Like, as in, I could run about 150 meters. And when I say run, I don't mean sprint, because that's how far most people can sprint. I could jog that far before I basically collapsed because I was just that unfit. And a lot of people at that point would say, well, I can't run. Like, it does no good. I can't get fit running because I cannot run. I'm not even fit enough to make the first run. But you just have to push through that uncomfortable stage. So run 150 meters, walk the next kilometer if you have to, run another 100 meters, walk 500 meters, run 50 meters, go home and pass out for 3 days, and do it again the next time. Except the next time, you might get 200 meters the first time. You won't have to walk for a kilometer. You'll have to walk for 500. You get what I'm saying. It just gets less and less awkward, less and less uncomfortable. And this isn't, I'm not trying to flex here, but it's like a couple of months later, like literally a couple of months, I could run 10 kilometers in under 50 minutes, and under 55, I think. And about a year later, I got that down to 10 kilometers in 47 minutes 30, which is exactly 4:45 a kilometer. And people who run a little bit will know that that's pretty fast, like depending on your standards of speed, but that's, that's fast for someone who was actually almost collapsing after a very short and easy run before. It's quick. And how did I do it? Just by not giving up at the uncomfortable stage, right? If it gets uncomfortable, that's where it begins, really. If you're not uncomfortable in your language learning, you're probably not learning very much. And I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm not trying to say like, oh, if you sit down and study with an app or something, then you're not learning anything. I just mean that you're not actually learning how to speak fluently. You only learn how to speak fluently by speaking non-fluently, by speaking badly, and then speaking slightly better the next time. And it actually doesn't all go smoothly. So like once I was at B1, maybe it stopped being the case that every single conversation would be better than the last one, because I would have good days and bad days. I'd be tired, I'd be more awake some days. Some days my Swedish would just come to me nicely, other days it wouldn't. And that's the same thing happens with running, same thing happens with anything. It's like form in sports, like good form, bad form, right? You just have to keep doing it until your previously good form becomes your bad form. Like until you're that much better at it, that when you have a bad day, that's how you were when you were good before. And when you have a good day, you sound excellent. I actually remember this quite clearly. I just had an amazing day languages-wise. I don't know what it was. Everything went right. And I spoke to some Norwegians and I felt Swedish. Like they thought I was Swedish. That always helps. But everything was just perfect. And then the same night I spoke French and that was coming to me really nicely. I don't know what it was. But you just have to ride the waves, essentially. You just have to take the good with the bad. But most of all, you have to learn to be uncomfortable. So speak before you think you're ready to speak, because you're not going to be. It just doesn't work. Like, you're not going to be ready before you've done it. No one goes into their first conversations like, yes, I'm ready to go, right? No, it doesn't work like that. So if you're wanting, like, people go, oh, what was your process of learning Swedish? My process was being really uncomfortable most of the time, right? And I don't know why we live in this society where it sort of seems to be almost like a shame to admit that, like it's as in it shames you to say, like, well, I just had to be uncomfortable a lot of the time. I guess it's what someone like Gary Vee would call hustle. Just work harder, right? And I'm not a hard worker. I guess I don't mind being uncomfortable in speaking situations. One person asked me particularly about the case of actually living in Sweden and how he, like, obviously had the chance to speak Swedish heaps, but basically never felt confident to do that and never felt able, and, you know, was very busy and all that, and spent 3.5 years there and didn't learn the language. Okay. I admit that that's a very difficult situation. Living in Sweden is actually, in the case of learning Swedish, probably more difficult than not, in a way, because over here, in Australia, when I speak Swedish to Swedes, it generally becomes clear pretty quickly that I'm not speaking to them so that I can speak English. Like, that's, you know, I'm not saying that I'm only speaking to you as long as you're speaking Swedish to me. No, but it's like, it's pretty clear that I want to take advantage of the fact that I'm speaking to them so that I can speak Swedish. So it's a little bit different. But again, most of my Swedish was not actually learned with live. It was learned online. So there's no reason that you can't do that in Sweden. If you're very busy, sure. But I mean, it depends how much of a priority it is. If you really, really want to learn Swedish, then you'll make time for it and just put room for, if you're working over there, then I guess you have to say to your employer, look, it's a priority of mine to learn Swedish, and that would be in the interest of your company. So can I have like these 2 hours off a week or whatever it is? You need to do something. You need to work out some way that you're going to have time to speak. But also, it's all the more important then that you're willing to push your comfort zone well outside of your comfort zone. I know this because I met a guy who was from Brisbane and lived in Sweden for 5 years. He spoke flawless Swedish. I say it's flawless. I'm not Swedish, but it sounded freaking good. And all the Swedes agreed with me that it sounded really good. They know. He said, and this is all in Swedish, by the way. This is how good his Swedish was, even though he knew I was an English speaker. I'm Australian at that. And he was happy to talk to me in Swedish, and I was happy to do that with him. And he told me that you just have to make some situations really uncomfortable. You have to be happy to have them. Like, someone would say to him, like, oh, you know, I need to talk to you about this. And he'd say, like, på svenska, like in Swedish. And they'd be like, no, like, this is serious. We really need to talk about this. And he'd say, ja, säg det på svenska. Say it in Swedish. Not YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the description. Say it in Swedish. He would say to them, just say it in Swedish, right? No matter how, and this is like other English speakers who are also trying to learn Swedish, but not as seriously as he was trying to learn it. And that's the thing. He was more willing to push outside his comfort zone, to go outside of his comfort, not really to be outside of his, I don't know. He was more willing to be outside of his comfort zone in order to learn Swedish, right? 5 years is plenty of time if you do that. It's heaps of time, actually. Man, what I could do with 5 years of living in Sweden. He was more willing to do that than they were, and he made them do it. And as a result, they learned Swedish as well. But his Swedish was flawless because basically he did everything in Swedish. And you might think, yeah, but I'm working. I've got like professional situations to deal with. Okay. There are still, I mean, he was working as well, by the way, but in situations where you've been employed as a non-Swedish speaker, so they know that you speak English and they're happy with that scenario because you're going to be talking to people from Finland and Germany and whatever, right? Then sure, speak English when you would be expected to speak it for work, but all the other times you can speak Swedish, and there are more other times. There are, like ordering food and all that. And if the person says to you, I have had this in Germany, I'm not as experienced as people who've lived abroad for a long time, but I have had this in Germany when I was young. If the people say to you, do you speak English? Like they hear you struggle in Swedish and they say, oh, do you want me to speak English? Just say no, right? Just say no. And don't say no, you don't speak English, although you can do, I've done that too. Like, no hablo inglés, right? And then they go, oh, you speak Spanish? No, I don't. But you can just say no, you don't speak English. But say no, I'm not willing to speak English. Most people don't want to cause a conflict. And when they say like, oh, it's fine, I'll speak English, they're trying to make you more comfortable, right? That's what they're trying to do. So as soon as you go, no, I'm not doing it. Nej tack, right? Then they kind of go, whoa. And yes, it gets a little bit, like they laugh, but it can get a little bit awkward where they kind of go, whoa, it's like, does he think I'm being rude or something? Just say, nej tack, jag behöver prata svenska, tack, right? I need to speak Swedish. Eller så jag behöver lära mig svenska. I need to learn Swedish. And it is, obviously I'm using Swedish because that's the guy asked the question about that, but it doesn't matter what language it's in. Swedish is one of the hardest. Danish, Icelandic, Norwegian, Dutch, they're all going to be some of the hardest because the people there speak excellent English and they know it. And they like to think that they speak better English than they do. But if you can do it in those languages, then you can definitely do it in like German, French, Arabic, any of those. Just say, no, I'm sorry, I need to learn this thing, and learn the spiel if you need to, for like, I need to learn this language, and I can only doing it. Bra jobbat. I need to learn this language, and I can only do that through speaking it, even when it's inconvenient. Right? Say that. I can't say that in Swedish, by the way. I don't know the word for inconvenient. But jobbigt kanske? No. So learn a spiel that just means, I'm sorry, I'm not going to speak English to you. It's not going to happen. And be prepared to go further than they are in their discomfort. Most people's tolerance for discomfort is low, which is why a lot of us make really bad language learners, because as soon as it gets uncomfortable, we just go, no, it's not worth it. I'm just going to speak English, right? Most people's tolerance for discomfort in any situation, especially social situations, is very, very low. So as soon if they say, oh, no, it's okay, we can do it in English, and you say in Swedish, Dutch, whatever. No, sorry, we're going to do it in Swedish and Dutch because I need to learn this. That will be most people's breaking point. They'll be like, okay, sorry. Other people might have a bit, and they'll be like, no, like, there's a line or whatever. Doesn't matter, right? The line will wait for, say, people from Syria who don't speak English, who only speak Arabic and they're trying to learn Swedish. The line will wait for those. Why can't it wait for you? Just because you happen to also speak English doesn't mean you should be at a disadvantage of that. Just be like, oh, jag bryr mig inte. I don't care. That's the thing. If you push past what is socially comfortable, the world is your oyster. And this is not in language learning. This is just in general. If you are willing to ask questions that other people don't want to ask because it's awkward, you will get a lot further in life. If you are willing to have difficult conversations that other people won't have because it's awkward, you will get further in life. Tim Ferriss talks about this. Mark Manson talks about this. This is basic human kind of achievement stuff. You need to be uncomfortable in order to learn a language. It is a huge, huge advantage if you just refuse to speak English in anything other than a very professional setting where you would be required to speak it anyway. Just don't do it, right? That is how you get from zero. Well, that's probably how you get from like A2 to B1. From zero, you have to do like some kind of traditional study, some just learning some words, learning some basic requests and hi, my name is, all that kind of stuff. But then you just have to push through the discomfort. That's what, if you can't see it that well on my montage video, but that's basically what you see. You just see a bunch of me pushing through discomfort until the point that så kan jag säga sådana saker. Och nu kan jag prata på videon inte utan svårt, men ni förstår vad jag menar, att det inte är svårt att prata när jag behöver prata. Yeah, so I know that this video is extremely rambly, and I hope you liked it anyway. I hope you got something out of it. It's also to help me get comfortable talking to a camera. Remember, push past your discomfort zone. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you like language learning content, please subscribe. Thanks, guys.